Hey guys, and welcome back. As I promised you, starting this video we're gonna get much more hands-on. We're gonna go into test case creation first and test preparation because this is one of the main activities that you're gonna be performing once you start working as a software tester in any company. In essence, as well, to mention, like the very essence of your work as a software tester in the beginning is going to be preparing test cases, like preparing for testing, then actually testing or executing your tests, then writing up bugs or defects as soon as you encounter them, and reporting on the results. This is really like the very essence of the work that you will be doing. There is a bunch more of the terminology. There you will be doing this in different phases of the project. You will be doing much more than what I just mentioned, but the core skills that you need to have and you need to master very well to become a good tester, or at least to be able to succeed on finding a job, landing a job, and then making a good impression and pushing through, are really these four things. So this is the first part. They're not really that complex. This is the first part to focus on. And it's also not complex, but it will form the foundation of everything else that you will be doing later on, including executing your tests, finding the defects. They will all be in some form related to the test cases that you create in the first instance. And why are test cases important, and why is creating test cases before you before you start executing your tests so important, is for multiple reasons, but just to name a few only. It helps you structure your thought process. So let's say you need to test a telephone or a pen or a camera, it doesn't really matter what. You would start thinking, okay, where do I start? Where do I finish? What do I do in between? How much information or how much testing is enough in this context or related to this feature or the other feature, etc., etc. So this helps structure your thought process, and you can get quite creative in this process, which will then later on lead to you being more efficient when you execute your test cases, and then obviously contributing to the overall efficiency of the project during its testing phases. Another important benefit of this is the fact that if you write good test cases, they will be reusable, and you will be part of a team or as part of the project where you will be working on, most likely, and there will be other people who will want to be executing certain test cases in one or another scenario. So if you write good test cases, then the whole project benefits from it, because, you know, let's say you are off on a certain day and you can't go to work, and someone needs to be, for some reason, testing something for which you have prepared test cases. If you have written up good test cases, like they are of good quality, which we'll cover very shortly, then that person is not going to need you to execute them, and they're going to be able to almost be as efficient as you would be when you were, if you were there. That's another benefit, and there's so many more. Like if you write up test cases, then you know which kind of test cases you can further down the line automate as well. If you don't, if you just go in and test without doing anything, you like look at the product, you look at the application you're going to be testing, you're like, okay, I'm going to just start messing around, and you don't leave any trace, then it's going to be very hard to understand. Of course, you can write up the bugs and you say, okay, so I have found some defects, they are now fixed, the application is good to go, but it's going to be very hard to maintain the work later on. And there's multiple benefits, as I mentioned, in relation to the test automation, to turning the existing test cases into some other sort of test cases to be used in later phases of the project, etc., etc. There is a lot of benefits, but as I promised, I'm going to keep this video purely practical. We're going to not be talking much more about like the theoretical benefits and the theoretical aspects of test case creation, and we're going to dive right in. Right, I have my screen shared, and we're going to start by simply creating a Word file. We're going to call it test cases, and we're going to open the document up. It's important to note here that what we're going to cover in this video is the pure basics of test case creation. As in, if you learn this, you will not be dependent on any specific tool later on in your career when you're creating test cases. Nobody now creates test cases in a Word file. But what I will try to convince you during this video is that it is possible to do it on a piece of paper with a pen. You don't need anything else. These are basic concepts which you just need to keep in your head, and then any tool you face, and we will have a video covering test case management tools as well, and defect management and so on and so forth. But if you master the basics of test case creation, if you were only to have a piece of paper and a pen, then you can do it anywhere, in any tool, and it's really very simple and very basic. So let's get right in. So let's say we have a blank paper and we have our pen, in this case the cursor, and we want to test something. Let's just think of something. Let's just open up the browser. We could, you could go to LinkedIn, you could go to your email application, doesn't really matter where you want to go. For the sake of this exercise, let's just take even Google. Yeah, like just let's just take this page in here without trying to complicate it further. But you can expand on as many examples as you want later on. You don't have requirements for this page, right? If you remember, in one of the first videos, we discussed how the test preparation phase is approached, as in you start engaging as a tester when even the requirements are defined, and you examine the requirements, you write up test cases off the back of the requirements. But in this case we don't have them, so we're gonna basically assume that we have certain requirements in place, or we're gonna approach it from the more exploratory standpoint. So what can we test on this page? First thing would be that if I type www.google.com, I get to the Google search page, which would be our expected result. So we're gonna just do that here right now. So we're gonna say, when I type, or let's make it right away a bit more formal. Yeah. So we'll say our test case number 1 is that we need to verify that when we input www.google.com in the address bar of the browser, we are landing on the Google search page. This is what we want to do, right, as our first step. And we will have more test cases in here. So I'm going to put test case 2, test case 3, and we will do this in a bit, just so that the picture gets clearer in your head. Now this would be our summary. This is a very primitive case, but it will help you kind of understand how to approach test case creation, and you know, obviously you won't have to go through so much overhead to be creating test cases for something as simple as a Google search page, or like the first test case in our case, just putting something in the address bar. But just for the sake of illustration, we're going to go through the whole structure of a test case on this example. So this would be our summary of the test case. And then I'm going to even write here what this is. You don't have to obviously write this, but just so that you visually can discern better what each of the parts is. Then what we need to do is we need to provide some sort of steps for someone, in this case us, but let's say, remembering the context of reusability of test cases that I mentioned in the beginning, someone else wanting to execute your test cases will find it hard to do so if you don't leave specific steps on what they should be doing. Again, in this example, it's quite primitive, but imagine like a way more complex case, then it will make more sense. So we will say steps, and our steps, for the sake of the example, I'm going to make it way more primitive than it really should be. But let's say it would be move your, or open a browser. In this case, we could even specify Chrome, or we could say it doesn't matter. Or we say, or any other. Then we say click on the address bar. So we move the cursor to the address bar, and then we click there, and then we say type www.google.com And then another step is to press the Enter key on your keyboard. This is the end of our step. This is what we literally did when we ended up on this page, right? So we opened the browser, we came to the address bar, we typed in google.com, we hit enter, and we ended up on this page. Now what do we do next? So if you had a requirement defined before this, like if you were in the very early phases of Google coming up with Google search and this page, you would, even before this page is built, you would know that this page is expected to show something like this, and it should have features like this and this and this and this, even before you would be able to see them actually functioning. So someone would have designed that literally on a piece of paper similar to this or another tool. They would have written, hey, developers, please create a search bar, like an address bar like this, or a search bar where someone would be able to provide input, or please create a logo which will be located in this location, etc., etc. So there will be a list of requirements, and that list of requirements will drive your expectation, would have driven your expectation in terms of writing up the test cases. So okay, this the source of truth, aka the design document or the solution document or whatever else, the spec, says that there should be a logo here, or there should be a bar in here, or anything else. In this case, let's assume there was a requirement which said when you enter www.google.com and hit enter on the address bar, you land on this page. Yeah, so this would drive our expected result, and that's exactly what we would write in here. We would say expected result, and we would write in here, let's make this a bit more visually pleasing, if it is at all in Microsoft Word. But anyway, so we in here say after pressing the enter key on the keyboard, what do we expect to see? We expect to see what should happen. The Google search page should appear with the Google, let's respect them for the work they've done and write the word in capital, for the Google with the Google logo and a search bar where the user can enter text. Yeah, that's it. That's your expected result. So your test case is kind of complete in here. So let's have a look and see what we've maybe missed. Okay, so you could say we could go further and define more stuff, right? We could either break it down into different smaller test cases or covered in this one to say, for example, okay, there should also be a Google search button, which after you type something, you can basically hit search and it will get there, or I'm feeling lucky button, or a Gmail button, or your account, some logos and stuff like that. But that's, in a nutshell, this is what you're after. The structure of the test case as it's defined in here. So you basically have a summary, you have test steps, and you have an expected result. We could, again, as I mentioned, we could here put down like also the buttons, etc., etc. Doesn't really matter. You get the idea. So is this it? Not really. This is the basics. So the very key, the meat and bones of the test case are the summary of a test case, the steps to execute, and the expected result. But there is more to it, which in certain scenarios can be helpful and in others not so. For example, other than the test steps, you could have test data as well, which you might want to predefine when you're already creating your test case. So you would write up things like input parameters, so data that you don't want to put in your test cases in here. So for example, your your www.google.com could be test data, because instead of this could be anything else as well, whatever else. And this is something that is key data to provide to the address bar for it to process. And you could restructure this test case to not say type google.com in here, but you could just say type data, type test data in the address bar, one by one, for example. And in here you could have different sets of test data. You could have www.google.com, you could have www.facebook.com, doesn't really matter. This is I'm oversimplifying this, and this is not really a very valid scenario for this kind of an approach to use test data, and we'll cover scenarios where this could be helpful shortly. But this is to give you an idea that the structure can expand and you can get really creative. Some tools don't even have a test data field when you're creating test cases. Other tools will have them. It's totally up to you. Test data can be easily embedded in the test steps. You can literally provide any sort of data that you want in the test steps as well. But in some cases, it's better to isolate them. That's the whole idea. So I'm going to put here test data optional. And also another thing which can be used interchangeably, like with test data, not necessarily, in some cases you can squeeze things here and there, but another idea is a precondition for a test case. So in this case, a precondition for a test case would have to be the fact that, let's say, there is electricity in the building, or that the computer is on, right? So there's something needs to happen before you're able to execute your test case. Again, you can specify that in here. You can specify that in the test cases, but depending on the cases, you might want to take advantage of being able to separate these fields into various ones, and it will make just things more efficient and more visually kind of understandable, etc. So in here you could say the computer is on and there is internet connection. As simple as that. So if you wouldn't have obviously a computer which would be on, or if you had a computer and it was on but there was no internet connection, this test case would not be valid. You would not be able to execute this test case. You would not be able to run even the first step. You could open the browser, but then it wouldn't do anything, because once you hit enter, it would return to you an error, and the test case would be invalid. So it would not be because Google doesn't function. It's not Google's fault. It's not a defect that you can blame Google for. It's rather you not having met certain conditions to make use of the application. As I mentioned, this can as well be easily embedded in the test steps. So instead of starting your first test case with being open a browser, you could just go ahead and say turn on your computer, and then you can have another step which would say make sure that you have internet connection. That's it. And that's why I'm also going to mark this as optional. Let me quickly tell you how these optional fields, test data and or precondition, can become very useful in which scenario, because these cases I mentioned pretty primitive. These can be very helpful when a lot of so let's start with the precondition field, where a lot of things need to happen before you start executing your test cases in this specific area. So let's say it's not okay, maybe Google is not the best example for this one, but let's say you have a complex application, I don't know, a retail application, like imagine Amazon, for example, and you want to test something in your shopping cart. In order to start executing that stuff, you could let's say you need to write 100 test cases for your shopping cart now. Instead of writing down every time in the test cases and making in the test steps and making the test steps way longer than they have to be, all of the preconditions that you have to meet before you get to your shopping cart, i.e. I don't know if you're logged in, although you don't need to be logged in technically to go to your shopping cart, but let's assume you have to be logged in to make sure you have selected an item, placed it in the basket, placed it in the shopping cart, etc. You would write it down in one precondition and reuse it in every next test case. That just saves time, and it's more understandable when it's isolated, and you can then modify the precondition once, and then it will impact, you can reuse that again for all of the test cases, and they will all still be valid for your shopping cart specifically. And now let's talk about the test data for a brief moment. When it can really be useful is when you need to provide loads of data, which again doesn't make sense to stick into the test steps. So let's say you are testing a banking application, or doesn't matter, any application where you're doing something in the background, not on the UI. Let's say you're testing parts of the database which have to be interacting with certain other features to be doing stuff. In those cases, you might want to specify certain queries or certain things that you need to perform on the database, like to enable a certain process on the database, which makes sure that then on the UI something else happens. And then you need to provide a query, for example, for that to be executed by the person who will be testing, like who will be using your test case to test, like it's you, or maybe if it's being reused by someone else. Those would be other cases where test data would make sense to be separated, because you would have loads of data which are not really steps. This is stuff that you can refer to in your test cases. You say use test data 1 in here and put it in this field, or run this test data in here in your steps, but the actual data would be specified elsewhere. And then there's some test cases where you have to iterate through different types of data. So you would have a table of data. Let's say you will have row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, and then you basically build up a matrix, and then you can refer to certain aspects of your matrix which will be fitted in your test data from within your test cases. It just makes the work more organized. That's really all there is to it. You could, in theory, not use any of this and still try to come up with a test case structure which fits everything in the test steps, but it would be humongous. It would look horrible. It would be very hard to read. It would be very hard to execute as well, and you as well would get very easily lost in all of that. These are the cases where these fields could become handy. Okay, cool. So and I also forgot to mention why summary is important. So it will become clear shortly after, but the summary is pretty much a simple way to get a brief understanding of what you're going to be looking at once you start looking further down into the test steps and the expected results, etc. It's basically, if you were to have 100 test cases and you want to understand what they are, you can read one sentence instead of reading through all of these different areas in here before you're able to understand what's going on. Okay, cool. Now let's do another test case, just for the sake of the example. Let's try to test the Google search button in here, and I am going to type in here test cases, or test case creation, and hit enter. And then it will yield a bunch of results. Now there's tons of things you could be testing in this scenario, right? And again, we're doing some exploratory stuff, so we don't have any predefined requirements for us, which makes it a bit harder, but this is also a real life example. You might be presented with a tool and asked to test it, and you might want to write up some test cases for it. So let's try to draft a test case for this scenario which we just executed now. So I'm going to say verify that when input is provided to the search bar, and enter, let's say, and the user presses enter. Again, we're making it very primitive, but I'm literally breaking it down so that you get to absolutely nail the very basics of this. Yeah, so we're saying verify that when input is provided to search bar and the user presses enter, they are redirected to the search results page. This would be one test case, and I'm gonna skip now the steps, but we will do them later. But just to illustrate how this thought process works, then something will come into question, as in, Are the results accurate? Is what I'm seeing now on the screen where I was redirected matching what I was searching? And that would be another thing to test. So you would say verify that the search results are accurate and pertaining to the text I have input in the search field. Right? There's another one. And you can go on like this forever. You could say test case 4. You could say test case creation. You could say, let's say not such an important one, but let's say you could say verify that the total number of returned search results is displayed at the top of the page. And you can go on like this forever, and you would have to, not really forever, you would have a defined scope in reality, and picking up something like the Google search to start testing is quite massive, although you get the idea how it works. And this is just to organize your thought process. Now you might look at these test cases and say, I don't really want to maybe check this first for some reason that the results are accurate. I would want to test this after I have tested this, for example, making sure that the number of the total results is there. Doesn't really matter. It allows you to structure your thought process, and you don't just come here without anything beforehand and start clicking around. You will literally open your computer or start your computer, find some place where your test cases are documented, and follow an order in a no stress manner without having to worry about you forgetting what you should have been tested or what you already have tested and what not, and so on and so forth. And also important to note, this video is going to be focused specifically on test case creation and not test case execution. We will have a separate session for executing test cases and different things in different tools related to test case execution. But again, if you only had a piece of paper and a pen, once you have executed this test case and it passed or it met your your expected result, i.e. it has passed testing, you would just write here pass. Maybe make it a nice green color, and say this one has also passed. You would also put there, and so on and so forth. So then now if you look at this sheet, you will see, okay, I had 4 test cases, and one of these has passed, this one has passed, these ones I haven't yet executed because I haven't written pass or fail in here. Yeah, cool. All right, so this is pretty much it when it comes to the structure of the test cases, and I want to keep this video short because we will return to test case creation later on when we're exploring test case management tools. But a few things to note in here is that you can practice this, and for now you can also use anything you want. You can use an Excel document. Let me show you something quick as well while we're on this topic. Let's create a quick Excel document. Oh, no, not this one. This one. Cool. All right. You can logically and intuitively start exploring different options to get creative with creating test cases. So if you are testing the Google site, you can pick up any site of your choice, by the way, if you want to practice this later on, and you should pretty much. You can structure your test cases. You could say, for example, I want one sheet in here to be the main page, or I don't know how Google really calls it, but let's say the search, the home page, let's call it main page or home page, doesn't matter, home page for Google search when you type google.com. You could call another one search results page. You could call another one pagination. Doesn't really matter. You can get creative. Pagination being this one. this stuff in here at the bottom where you have different pages to find different results. Yeah, and then you can bring your test cases in here. You could just say, okay, I want to create a structure like this. I want this to be my summary column. I want this to be my precondition column. If you want to use it, depending on what you will find to test, precondition column, this could be your test steps, this could be your test data, and this could be your expected result. Cool. So you would basically literally do the same thing as we did in here. You would pick up your test case summary and drop it here. I'm gonna make this wrap a bit in here. Cool. Let's assume our precondition is optional in this case, so I'm gonna make it not applicable, NA, and I'm gonna bring my test steps here. Make it a bit more pretty, just like this. And I'm gonna, in this case we don't have any test data, and then I'm gonna bring my expected result in here as well. And now you will see that it really doesn't matter. We changed the tool just now, if you haven't noticed. So we were using a piece of paper, or in this case a blank Word document, to start our work, and now we have a little bit more complex structure in here, but which provides us with much more options, and it's much more user-friendly when it comes to writing up specifically test cases for this task, because here you could also say test status, or just status, doesn't matter, and it will be much more visually kind of clear when you execute your tests. We're literally building a test case management tool together, a very primitive one, but it will work. You could actually use it. And all of the stuff that we used in here in the Word document came here, and it works just fine, and you could just continue dropping in your test cases. And I mean, this we actually did in the wrong place, so I'm going to cut this and bring this to the home page, because this is where our test case pertained to. But this structure will give you the opportunity to actually structure all of your test cases much better. So you could, for every grouping of your testing, like if you want to write test cases for the home page, you drop them all here. Then you want to write some test cases for the search results page in here, so anything that you see in here, you drop them here. It just makes it much easier for you to navigate once you have a structure like this established. And then the tools can get way more complex. You can have dedicated test case management tools which have a bunch of good features, where you can attach screenshots, attach videos, run automated tests on, group them, label the test cases, run them in different orders, in phases. A bunch more stuff on top of this but at the end of the day, it's just another tool. As you can see, the Word file literally easily transformed into this Excel file. The whole essence of the work we didn't change. It's there. It's just more user-friendly now. And that's exactly it. You don't have to worry about not knowing any tool if you know the basics of test case creation. Okay, cool. And lastly, I'm gonna tease you a little bit with something which we will be going through in our next video, which is what happens if your test case fails. So say you wanted to verify that the search result was accurate after you clicked enter or search, after you have input your text. What happens then? What happens if you have a big red failure in here? Well, then you write a bug, you write a defect, and that will be the topic of our next video. It's the exact same. We're going to use the exact same approach. We're going to use a piece of paper. We're going to start from Word, and then we're going to progress further from there. It's the second most important thing you will have to be doing. The biggest value that you as a tester will be bringing is identifying defects to help companies or projects fix them. So we will use the same approach. we will be going through the very basics, and then you will really become independent from any tool when it comes to employing your skills for defect creation, as well as you will do for test case creation after this video. Cool. At the end of the video, I would like to recommend you guys to practice this as much as you can. So literally go to any, create an Excel document. If you don't have Excel, it's totally fine. Go to create a Google Sheet. It will be the same pretty much thing. 1 second, let me help you there. I'm pretty sure most of you, if you're watching this video, know how to use Google Sheets, but you could just come to your Google account and you can come to Google Sheets, and you have an Excel structure in here. You can also use the Google Doc, like I don't know how it's really called, Google Writer, I believe, as the Word equivalent of Google, basically. Yeah, Google Docs. And you can create a document in here and you can put there. And then you can practice this. So you create your structure the way you want, and you can come to any website you want. Go to, I don't know, anything. What do I have in here? Bookmark. Go to this website, some website showing some artwork and whatnot. Go here and start testing it. Go to your favorite website, go to your Facebook account, go to your mail application. It doesn't really matter what. Create a structure, think about it. Think like, okay, what do I want to test this? How, in what ways can I split the work that I'm going to be doing? Split it into different categories, create a sheet. You can start with Excel actually, now that you know that this is more user-friendly. You don't need to do like me, like starting on a Word file and then transferring it there. You could just start with an Excel document right away. So group them. For every grouping, create a sheet in here, like I have, like homepage, search results, pagination, and then start putting your test cases, focusing on these key areas: the summary, the precondition, test steps, test data, expected result, test status. And then drop them in and start executing them. You will not be I will not be surprised if you actually end up finding a defect on the application that you will be testing once you put all of this together. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Good luck with this, guys. We're starting to get into really serious topics which will be really the essence of the work that you will be doing. And if you do this well, the rest is really not so important. Like these areas you need to master very well. So this is where practice will make you become way better. So do spend the time to practice on this a bit. And once you master this a bit, we'll be meeting again and we'll be doing the same exercise, but for defects. And once you know that, then you're almost set. We'll do a few more videos and you'll be on your way to starting to apply for different companies. All right, good luck, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.